This week on the Wheelhouse. Immigration, crime, rhetoric. A new age of law enforcement in America. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. And right here in Connecticut, there's been a surge in arrests by federal immigration officials in recent weeks. The White House has stepped up immigration enforcement all over the country, and it's targeting Connecticut, calling it a sanctuary for undocumented migrants. At the same time, President Donald Trump has deployed National Guard troops to Washington, D.C., threatening to do it in Chicago as well, in a crime abatement effort. Last week, I sat down with U.S. Senator Chris Murphy. We talked about all that and grabbed his take on the state of our democracy. We start this week's show with that interview. Here it is. Chris Murphy is a United States Senator representing Connecticut in Washington, D.C. Thank you for coming on the Wheelhouse, Senator.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, some critics have used words like authoritarian or even fascist to describe the Trump administration. I know you've said that there may be months, not years, before American democracy is rendered so damaged it can't be repaired. That was 2 months after the president's inauguration. What do you say now?
Well, this country looks less and less like a democracy every single day. As we speak, there are federal troops on the streets of Washington, D.C. You have a president who is on a regular basis violating the law in order to try to compel loyalty to him from the business community, from the higher education community, from the legal community, from governors and from Congress. We are a nation of laws, and the fact of the matter is, if we don't stand up to this president, his corruption and his lawlessness, we may not be a democracy much longer. Now, listen, I'm not saying we're not going to have an election next November. We will, but look at what Trump is trying to do, threatening to lock up his political opponents, trying to bully college presidents into not allowing protest on campuses. This ultimately could have the impact of really drying up the resources that the opposition party has to litigate an election. And he might be at 33% approval next November, and we still don't have a true, free, and fair election.
How are you pushing back? You're talking about standing up. How are you standing up, and how should others?
Yeah. I've essentially stopped raising, political money for myself and for my own reelection, which is still a long way away. And I'm raising money instead to support protest and mobilization all around the country. I created something called the American Mobilization Project. We've raised about $1.5 million. We've probably already made grants of about $500,000 to grassroots citizen-led organizations all across the country that are protesting Trump's corruption, his Medicaid cuts, his nutrition cuts. I'm also trying to argue for my colleagues to act a little bit more boldly. For instance, we're going to have a debate coming up in September about the coming federal budget. I don't know how Democrats sign on, vote for a budget that doesn't roll back Trump's corruption and his lawlessness. We're really going to give him the votes to fund the DOJ, and then he's going to take that money and use it to take over police departments, potentially in our state. Democrats at some point have to decide that we're not going to be complicit in this creeping totalitarianism. That's a hard thing for Democrats to do, but at some point we have to see the writing on the wall. This democracy is just not healthy, and I'm not sure that we can give him, votes to create a kind of bipartisan endorsement for what he's doing.
We're talking about Democrats. You've been vocal. California Governor Gavin Newsom, he's taking an aggressive approach. He's talking about not only challenging the administration, but also redistricting, and even using some social media trolling as well. So what do you make of all this and how we should be responding if you're a Democratic lawmaker?
Well, listen, I support everything that Governor Newsom is doing, both from a policy perspective and a rhetorical perspective. From day one, I've said you have to be contesting this president every single day. Every time he does something illegal, every time he does something corrupt, you have to push back. You don't sort of hold back your power. You don't hold back your fire. He floods the zone. We flood the zone. And then we have to fight fire with fire. Listen, I wish that we weren't talking about redistricting in the middle of the 10-year cycle. But if Republicans are going to do it, then Democrats have to do it. Democracies die when the regime, the party in power, operates outside of the box, is violating norms and traditions, and the opposition party decides to just stay comfortably inside the box. So, yes, what California is doing is necessary. Listen, I think Connecticut probably is going to have to take a look at what we can do as well. Now, we have 5 Democratic members of the House right now, but we don't have a nimble redistricting law. And every Democratic state may have to be in a position to have a nimble way to redraw districts if this is the road that Republicans are dragging us down.
CT6 again or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, we could certainly draw our lines differently in Connecticut to have even more secure Democratic districts. I wish that didn't have to be a conversation we engaged in, but I think every democracy-loving state is going to have to start thinking of the things that we can do to try to contest the Trump regime's lawlessness.
You've implored your Democratic colleagues since the election to adopt a populist message focused on breaking up corporate power. And the party has to be one, I think this was in the New Yorker Radio Hour piece that you did, where it invites people in as long as they agree with the party on the basic economic message and then kind of build the party out that way. So I think about everybody being under a tent, so to speak. So how inclusive of that is somebody that is fighting for their identity if they're trans, or somebody that's worried about like an anti-DEI message?
Yeah, listen, my belief is that we have to be in the business of winning elections. We're trying to save our democracy right now. And so we can choose to be an ideologically pure party in which we say there's no room for you in our party if you don't believe exactly what I believe on transgender rights, or you don't believe exactly what I believe on gun control. But that would relegate us to be a permanent minority party, and our democracy would be gone in our lifetime. So what I want us to do is win elections. And I think the quickest way to win elections as Democrats is to become a party that has a sort of twin tent pole. We are a party that is for unrigging our democracy, breaking up concentrated corporate power, and we are a party that is for unrigging our democracy, getting anonymous billionaire corporate money out of our politics. If you're for those two things, we want you in, even if you don't agree with us on climate or guns or abortion. Our party will still be a party where the majority belief is that we're pro-choice and we're pro-gay rights and that we want our gun laws changed. But if we won more elections, we'd frankly have a better.
But you still could come under the tent.
But still come into the tent. And if we win more elections, we'll have a better chance at getting all of those policies enacted, the tentpole policies on economics and democracy reform, but also the things that as a Democratic Party we're still going to have majority support for on cultural and social issues.
I only have time to ask you about one or two more questions. So I really want to hone in on what you were kind of talking about earlier with action in Connecticut and people perhaps worried about maybe troops coming into Connecticut, or at least National Guard troops, because they've seen it happen in D.C. Recently, immigration and customs enforcement officials in Boston, out of Boston because it's ICE Boston, confirmed that 65 people were apprehended by ICE in Connecticut over a 4-day span this month. Boston's ICE field office director praised this effort and said it makes Connecticut safer. Is Connecticut indeed safer following this ICE action?
No, it's absolutely not safer. This is not a safe country when you have masked men picking up people without any due process. We absolutely know that there are cases of American citizens being picked up by these masked men, people who have a legal right to stay in this country. Many of the people that they are picking up are in this country actively applying for asylum. And what we also know is that this whole narrative that you have something to fear from immigrants to this country has zero basis in fact. What is true, in fact, whether Republicans want to believe it or not, is that immigrants to this country commit crimes at a rate lower than natural-born citizens. And so the safest neighborhoods in this country, this is what the statistics tell you, are the neighborhoods that have the highest number of immigrants. And so this is just a set of racist tropes designed to try to make Americans scared of each other, scared of their neighbors, in order to distract the country from the real thievery and corruption that is happening. Trump is stealing from us every single day, and he's trying to distract America from that thievery and corruption by making us believe that we have something to fear from our immigrant neighbors.
As we finish up here, can we just focus on the rhetoric involving some of this ICE action? The Federal Department of Justice recently identified Connecticut as a sanctuary jurisdiction in a letter to our Attorney General, William Tong. Tong says that's an erroneous designation. Why is this problematic, and what does it mean for immigration enforcement here?
Well, I don't even know what they mean when they say a sanctuary city. I mean, what do we do in Connecticut? We tell our police officers that you should be focused on the real security threats, that you should not be running around your city rounding up peaceful, undocumented Americans, that we want you to be going after the rapists and the arsonists and the murderers.
Ask it, and this is what I'm saying. I think, does this designation essentially mean, hey, we view you as a sanctuary place, so we essentially might have carte blanche if we want to on immigration enforcement? Is that kind of how you see it? What should we be thinking about on the ground?
Well, that may be what the Trump administration thinks, but that's not what the law allows. Okay. So the law does not allow for federal funds to be withheld from a state simply because of the prioritization that we give to police officers and how they arrest people. He doesn't get to violate the law and throw people in jail who have pending asylum claims just because of state immigration policies. So the law is still the law, and we can still be a compassionate state to immigrants, to migrants, and to undocumented Americans. And the law is on our side when it comes to that decision that we have historically made as a state.
U.S. Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat out of Connecticut, thank you so much for coming on the Wheelhouse.
Appreciate it.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is the Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. After the break, Harvard professor Archon Fung and Mark Hugo Lopez of the Pew Research Center join us to unpack some of what we just heard from Senator Murphy. Let us know what you thought about Senator Murphy's stance on the recent ICE arrests across the state. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. 888-720-9677. Give us a call now. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. This hour, we've spoken to the U.S. Senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy, about the state of democracy and President Donald Trump's stance on crime. And now we'll unpack some of what was said by Senator Murphy with Professor Archon Fung. Archon is the Winthrop Laffin McCormick Professor of Citizenship and Self-Government at Harvard Kennedy School. Archon, good to talk to you again. How are you doing?
Hey, it's great to be on the show again, Frankie.
So great to have you, especially in this pivotal moment in American history. Thank you so much. Also joined by the Director of Race and Ethnicity Research at the Pew Research Center, Mark Hugo Lopez. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Frankie. How are you?
I'm doing well, and even better because you logged on this morning to talk to us. I really appreciate you coming on. We hope you folks will enjoy the conversation that we're about to have. Want to ask you all, has the federal immigration crackdown impacted your life, your business? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. We're standing by for phone calls because we've got some great folks that can help us contextualize what's happening. And I'd love to get some of Archon's initial reactions to what we just heard in the last segment from Senator Murphy. Go ahead, Archon.
Yeah, I thought Senator Murphy's comments were great. I just had two quick thoughts to open up. One is he called it a creeping authoritarianism. I think it's kind of an Usain Bolt speed authoritarianism. So we can talk about.
Don't make me laugh about authoritarianism at 9:20 in the morning there with that great dazzling reference there, Archon.
Yeah, so I was talking to some friends who had been in Hungary, a few months ago. You remember when Rumeysa Öztürk, the student from Tufts, got arrested by ICE, and they were reporting a cafe conversation. Hungary, of course, has been, a decade into their authoritarian backsliding. And in the cafe conversation, people were saying, wow, we didn't know the government could just throw people in the back of vans. So I think it's, maybe part of this administration's contribution to Democratic backsliding is that kind of activity. And then the second thought, the only political entity that's less popular than Donald Trump now is the Democratic Party. And so in your conversation with Senator Murphy, I thought you had a great conversation about the size of the tent. But I don't really think that's the issue. I think what Donald Trump and the MAGA movement has managed to accomplish is being able to say to people in a compelling way, I hear you, I'm listening to you, and I'm for you. And I think the Democrats, by and large, almost all of them, have not managed to achieve that level of connection with their supporters and the American electorate. And I think that's a big problem for the Democrats.
The real concern that he has about the health of democracy in the U.S., do you obviously share a concern like that? And let's go into the terminology here. I'm glad you brought that up. Backsliding is something we usually use when something happens sort of slowly. Murphy used the term creeping. You're saying it's more of a Usain Bolt level. We're basically not even 200 days into a presidency, so I don't know if you're concerned about democracy. Backsliding or creeping is a term that you can use.
Yeah, I'm very concerned. Earlier on in your interview, you asked him whether he thought authoritarianism was overblown or that's happening. I definitely think authoritarianism is the right word to use, and we should be precise. Why people call it authoritarianism is that the leader thinks that he or she is the sole source of authority or the main source of authority. I think we've seen that happen. Part of being the sole source of authority is you don't like dissent and you're willing to use government power to quash dissent. I think we've seen that happen. You don't really like checks and balances because the whole idea of checks and balances is there are other sources of authority. And so I think we've seen some pressure against checks and balances. Authoritarians also usually use force to get their way. And with the dramatic increase of the ICE budget in the big bill, I don't know what the middle adjective is, but the big bill that was just approved, we see the increase of the capacity of the president to use force by really beefing up the largest law enforcement agency or enforcement agency. Whether it's lawful or not, we can debate. Enforcement agency that's available to the federal government and most loyal to the president. And then I think Senator Murphy was exactly right in drawing attention to the importance of the 2026 and 2028 elections. He said, we will have elections. I think we will have elections. To my mind, that is a pivotal inflection point in the future of American democracy. How free and fair will they be? And will the people who got the most votes, especially for House of Representatives seats, actually get seated?
It's an important thing because when you're talking about democracy, you talked about Viktor Orban in Hungary. When people openly question elections happening, that's something I hear on NPR nationally and the BBC, and I think is something that you're not necessarily going to hear in America. So whether or not you think that this is happening in America, it's very interesting at least to hear people openly question that. Mark, another thing Murphy says in this interview is that numbers say immigrants don't commit as much crime as natural-born citizens. Is he correct, Mark?
A lot of research the last couple of decades shows that you take a look at immigrants in places where immigrants live, and crime rates tend to be lower. If you look at immigrants across time, a lot of research has shown that over the years, immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than people born in the United States. So yes, there is evidence to support the senator's point of view. But it's interesting when you do a public opinion survey asking Americans about what impact will Trump's immigration actions have on crime, about 41% of Americans say it'll result in less crime. 37% say it'll have no impact. But it's really Republicans who are saying that the president's actions on immigration are going to lead to less crime. 75% of them say that in a summer survey that we did in June.
And thank you for that summer survey. That's something we're going to tap into in a little bit. I'm actually going to jump back to Archon on the integrity of the midterm elections, something I missed and should have asked you a little bit earlier. If Americans start losing confidence in elections, Archon, what does that do to the legitimacy of government and to our democracy as a whole?
I think it's a huge problem. Many Americans have already lost a lot of confidence in our elections. I don't know what Mark might know the most recent surveys, but as of a year ago or a few months ago, 4 out of every 10 voters didn't really believe that Joe Biden legitimately won the 2020 election. And so elections are the way that we have of settling, who gets to hold office for the next 2 years or the next 4 years. And if Americans lose confidence, if the winners, the widely acknowledged winners, don't get seated, that's a huge problem for American democracy. And I think many moves of this administration so far are removing some confidence and create some weakness in the upcoming elections, including, as you mentioned, the gerrymandering and the interview with Senator Murphy.
Another thing Murphy expressed alarm in was Trump sending troops to Washington, D.C., citing crime. NPR analysis of crime data shows that the homicide rate in D.C. has climbed steadily since 2012 when the city hit a historic 50-year low. But it's not anywhere near what we saw in the early 1990s, where it was a particularly rough time in the city. Is that kind of federal intervention in a city a red flag for democracy, or is it kind of typical in some way?
Well, I was reading a couple of weeks ago, Eisenhower, you might think, is the president who is most likely to favor the military. Evidently, he ordered troops in D.C. not to wear their uniforms when they're in public because he thought it was unbecoming of a democracy for a military presence to be so visible in the nation's capital. So I think it's a huge problem. I also think that the rationale for law enforcement in cities through the National Guard is a complete red herring. I mean, the purpose of the federal enforcement agency, I mean, there are a number of purposes. One of them is immigration. Another is maybe the constituency just likes to see guys in body armor and assault rifles running around, but it is no way to fight crime. In Boston last year, the total number of homicides, I believe, was 24 people, which is incredibly low. And that is a product of a decade or two of really hard work between local law enforcement and ministers and community organizations. And that's what you want to do if you take crime and crime fighting and public safety really seriously. And so what's happening now has very little to do with reducing the rate of crime.
888-720-9677. We'd love your phone calls. Talk to Archon, Mark, and myself. We also have a good story coming from you that we should be telling you in the next segment. 888-720-9677. Archon, something else that fascinated me in that NPR piece I was invoking was a quote from Thomas Abb, the founding director of the Center for the Study and Practice of Violence Reduction at the University of Maryland. He says people say crime is up in D.C., people say it's down. That all depends on where you set your goalposts. Trump is obviously openly disputing the crime data and is directing the Federal Department of Justice to look at the numbers. What does his actions there say about where we are in this moment? And is he sort of a goalpost mover? Trump.
I think he's trying to frame the issue around crime. Law and order is a good issue politically for Republicans. I think it's obviously, maybe not obviously, I think it's a mistake for Democrats or anyone else to deny the reality of crime and fear of crime. And the debate we should be really be having is how to create greater order. And I believe that what's happening is creating disorder, as Senator Murphy said.
Let's dig into Senator Murphy's comments on ICE presence across the country, Mark. Back in June, the Pew Research Center released a survey suggesting 1 in 4 Americans were worried about themselves or somebody they know being deported. Tell me where you can find the survey and then a little more about it, please.
Yeah. So the survey can be found at pewresearch.org. That's PEW research.org. And this was a survey that we did of the U.S. adult population asking about a whole range of things around attitudes towards deportations. One of those things was asking the U.S. public how much they worry that they themselves or somebody they know, like a family member or a friend, could be deported. And as you noted, about 1 in 4 Americans say that. That number was up slightly from the start of the Trump administration. Notably, among Hispanics, that number was almost half who were saying that they worry that they themselves or somebody they know might be deported. That number too was up. And also, as you might expect, immigrants or the US born children of immigrant parents who are now adults are also concerned about deportations of somebody they know. The survey is important for at least measuring the sort of sense of worry about those in people's personal orbits who might be affected by some sort of a deportation action. But it's also important to note that this is not just a survey of people who they themselves might be at risk for deportation. It's sort of a sense of how people generally worry about that. And that's what makes this important and powerful. It shows that this is not just about unauthorized immigrants and their families being worried about deportation, but it's something that's affecting more broadly the US public. 1 in 4 US adults is a lot of people if you think about that.
And it's about you and somebody else, but also you did ask folks if they're worried about they themselves being deported, and that number has gone up as well.
That number has gone up as well. And in fact, we find that many Americans are also engaging in a number of actions to be ready should they be asked to prove their citizenship or prove, in other words, provide papers. Now, the numbers are still relatively low, about 10% or so, depending on the group that you're looking at. But we have seen an uptick in the share of Americans who are doing things to, if should they be asked about it, provide a passport or provide identification to prove that they're U.S. citizens or in the country legally.
Archon Murphy also criticized ICE's recent arrests here in Connecticut. He says the data shows that this type of action does not make our communities safer. When we see these forms of large-scale enforcement actions, what is the ultimate impact on trust in government?
I think the ultimate impact on trust in local government, which I think is most relevant because it's the people living in these communities, is to decrease trust. I think a lot of local police forces have worked very hard to earn the trust of immigrant communities and communities of color. And this is unwinding that trust, especially when local law enforcement has cooperative agreements with ICE. I think it's really not good. And again, I think the purpose is not at all community safety. That is like, if you are interested in community safety, you'd be doing the opposite. I think there's pretty good reporting about Stephen Miller and other administration officials putting a great deal of pressure on ICE administrators that flows down just to simply crank the numbers up. And I think that's what's happening.
We actually have a caller, and I'd love for one of you to respond to what she has to say. Deborah from Watertown, good morning. Thank you for calling in today.
Thank you. I think we've got way too many people who don't understand how our immigration system currently works. Many of the people who are here undocumented had zero possibility of coming here legally. I'm thinking in particular of a woman I met, I know from a literacy effort, who came here from Ecuador. She walked here from Ecuador through jungles. She and her husband left their 2 young children behind in their mother-in-law's care. And because they did that and took that chance, their 2 daughters have graduated from high school. Now, this is a woman who was not literate when she came here, had zero chance of coming here legally. We need to understand that the people who come here are the best of the best. And every single president before this one, you can find quotes from saying how much our country has benefited from immigration. Reagan, Eisenhower, going way back. And we are just destroying ourselves, our healthcare system, our home care system by terrorizing and deporting people.
Deborah, thank you so much for that important testimony there. Is your friend okay? How's your friend doing at this time?
She is okay, but she and her husband are just, trying to stay under the radar, which is very hard when they have to drive from one place to another to get to work.
Deborah, thanks again. Have a good morning. I appreciate you calling in. When I talked to Deborah, just as I did right there, something that came to mind that I think is important for this conversation is just kind of going back to a definition of what immigration is and what you could do. And I think Mark could jump in on this as well. It sounds like no matter what, and I've heard this from the administration and Caroline Leavitt, from Trump himself, anybody that comes into this country and is seeking asylum is here illegally and therefore a criminal. But by very definition, if you are seeking asylum, you have an opportunity at least at some form of path to citizenship. Can you guys help me with that letter of the definition there?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Frankie. And so somebody who comes into the U.S. And seeks to claim asylum, they maybe have entered the U.S. without authorization. So they present themselves at the U.S.-Mexico border. They've crossed the border. They wait for a border patrol agent to come by. They've entered the country, quote unquote, illegally, but then they ask for asylum. There's a whole process that happens with that. And during that process, that person is protected from deportation. They aren't going to be deported as their application is being processed. Once a decision is made, and that could take years, by the way, because they have to go through court, the case has to be heard. It could take some time for a decision to be made, but it may be that the court decides that immigrant should be deported. But while they're waiting, they are protected from deportations. And there's many other statuses, by the way, that protect undocumented or unauthorized immigrants from deportation, like the Temporary Protected Status Program or the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the Dreamers Program. Those are other ones that have protections for immigrants in the country illegally from deportation, and even give them a work permit. But these are all programs that the Trump administration has been talking about either eliminating or has already done something to change some of those protections for some groups, like the program that existed for Cuban, Nicaraguan, Haitian, and Venezuelan migrants who'd come to the U.S. in recent years. Those folks who had been on parole had protections as well. They entered the country without authorization, but they had a sponsor who agreed to support them. And yet that program, which affected over 500,000 people, has been terminated.
The Connecticut Mirror published data recently that shows the number of ICE arrests from the first half of 2025 were double the amount over the same time period in 2024. Mark, are you seeing that outside of Connecticut? Is that kind of similar to what's happening across the nation?
It seems to be. In fact, our look at some of the most recent data available, though I want to stress this is preliminary data from the federal government, shows that the U.S. immigrant population has declined since January. And in January, we reached a historic peak. Over 53 million immigrants living in the country then, about 15.8% of the U.S. population. But through June into July, we've seen a decline in the population of immigrants, about 1 million plus. We're not sure exactly how many, but that may be for a number of reasons, including fewer people coming at the U.S.-Mexico border, increased deportations, but also people in the natural flow of things choosing to leave the country who are maybe already going to do so, or maybe have also chosen to self-deport. We just don't know what all those different numbers are, but it does look like the population of immigrants is declining.
Just in the last minute or so, I have you both. Archon, I want to get your final thoughts. What role can ordinary Americans play in protecting democratic institutions? Is this up to Murphy and the Democratic Party, or is this up to Americans, I guess?
It is not. It is up to ordinary Americans. And I think all of us, all 300 million of us, have to recommit to elections and be vigilant about that. There have been demonstrations in favor of democracy in thousands of communities all around the United States. I think we all have to watch what's happening and take action and support each other. And I just want to say, encourage Deborah to keep speaking out, because her intervention was a part of a conversation about what kind of country we want to have. Do we want to have super high barriers where people from other places can't come in at all? And when you're trying to go through your process in court, you get taken in the court waiting room and deported? Or do we want to have some compassion and sympathy and invitation to people from other places? And that's a debate that this show is all about. And Deborah's personal story was just a beautiful one. And we need to be talking about it at the people level rather than capital R versus capital D level.
That's Archon Fung, Winthrop Laughlin McCormick, professor of citizenship and self-government at the Harvard Kennedy School. Archon, so great to have you on the show. Thank you for coming by today.
Thanks so much, Frankie.
And Mark Hugo Lopez, dazzling debut on the Wheelhouse. Thank you so much for coming by. The Director of Race and Ethnicity Research at the Pew Research Center. Thank you so much for coming on, Mark.
Thank you, Frankie.
After the break, a look at special immigration status reserved for abused migrant youth in Connecticut. This is something you're going to want to hear, the story that we're working on here at Connecticut Public, and how this status is being rolled back. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. President Donald Trump recently rolled back protections for abused and neglected migrant youth. There's a special status given to these people. Joining me now are two of my Connecticut Public colleagues who are reporting on how this legislative action is impacting migrants in Connecticut. Daniela Doncel, Latino Communities reporter for Connecticut Public. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. And thank you for doing this story. It's something we've been talking about for months, basically. Yeah. And also joining us, Maysoon Khan, investigative reporter for Connecticut Public, who did a phenomenal job helping Daniela put this story together. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here.
And thank you for going through all the data and all the documents. I appreciate that as always. Danny, your investigation centered around a program known as SIJS, a special juvenile immigration program. Can you tell us about it and who this program is for?
Yeah, absolutely. So Special Juvenile Immigration Status, or SIJS, is a type of immigration classification, and it's granted to eligible migrants under the age of 21 who have been neglected, abused, or abandoned by one or both parents in their home country and have now found themselves living in the United States. It was created back in the 1990s as a step or as a way to give these children a step towards getting their green card or permanent legal residency.
And they're generally in a pretty bad situation, I would imagine, if they're given that status.
Oh, absolutely. These are children that have found their way here by some form or another because they could not stay in their home country. It was not in their best interest to stay.
Former President Joe Biden made a change to this program. Can you help us understand sort of what that change entailed?
Yeah, so the wait time to actually apply for a green card is years long. Right now, the wait time is about 4 years or more. So back in 2022, the Biden administration created what's called a deferred action policy. So this policy essentially states that recipients of SIJS are protected from deportation while they wait to be able to apply for that green card. The policy also gave them an opportunity to apply for legal work authorization so that they could work legally while they waited as well.
And then Trump and the new administration, they've tweaked the program?
Yes. So in June, the Trump administration rolled back the policy. So USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, announced that it would no longer automatically consider granting deferred action to new SIJS recipients. So essentially what that means is new recipients from June onward are no longer going to be able to get that work authorization and are now at risk of being deported.
Mason, the story that you and Danny tell here is a young woman, Regina, who's at the center of the investigation. And a little warning to the listeners here. We want to make sure that you know we're going to be discussing abuse and neglect during the remainder of the show. So I just want to make sure that we make that clear to you all. Mason, can you tell me about Regina, who she is and where she grew up?
Yeah, Regina is a 19-year-old girl. She loves pink. She's in school right now, part-time in college. She really wants to be a lawyer. She's a big sister, and she's very well articulated. And she just could tell her story in a very compelling way, which stood out to both of us, why we wanted to go forward with interviewing her for this. And the one thing about Regina is, obviously, she's applying for SIJS, and she endured a lot of neglect and abuse in her home country, Mexico. She lived there with her mom, and she described being beaten daily. We reviewed DCF reports, which is kind of part like the precursor to applying for SIJS. You need a state court order. Part of that is DCF goes in and they interview her family. And in those reports, it describes her being beaten daily, pinched, going days without food, not adequate shelter, and things like that. And how Regina described it was a lot of fending for yourself. And so that's kind of her story that we were very, fortunate to hear from her. Very proud of her for sharing that with the public as well. But yeah, that's kind of a little bit about her.
So how the heck did she get to the United States? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so her father lives in the United States. So while she lived with her mother in Mexico during her childhood, she would visit her dad on, summer holidays, things like that. And so I think there was just one summer a few years ago where she was crying and she said, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. The abuse is getting too much. She just did not want to go back. And her dad kept her here. He said, we're going to find a way to keep you here permanently and legally. And, I think they're both happy that they're finally getting to that point.
Danny, are there many options for neglected or abused youth like Regina?
Not really. At least in Regina's experience, she went across different immigration attorneys with her father and were turned away at every point, basically telling that they didn't have any good options. And it got to a point with Regina and her father that they kind of were losing hope. That is until Regina met Aaron. Aaron O'Neill is an immigration attorney based out of East Hartford. And Aaron, when we spoke with her, told us that when she heard Regina's story, she automatically just knew that Regina was eligible for SIJS. And it was a moment that really brought a lot of emotion out of Regina and her father, because given their previous experience, they didn't think it was going to happen.
Let's hear from Regina about when she found out about SIJS status and the opportunity to apply for it.
She asked to see my dad, so we both went there. And on our way back home that day, he started crying. My dad started crying, and he's like, we've been told no so many times. Like, I never thought that this would be happening right now. And I'm like, I know, me neither. And I started crying. And it was crazy. We're so happy. We feel very blessed.
This is just about hearing about the program, not even getting into that long line that it is to apply and then actually get the status. But this was just momentous for them hearing about it.
Oh, absolutely. It was something that was so unexpected, and it gave them hope, the hope that they were kind of losing already because of the fact that they were turned away so many times.
Where does the application go first when you're applying for SIJS, and then kind of, I don't know if there's necessarily a timetable, but kind of what happens from that point on?
Yeah. So as Maysoon mentioned earlier, before you can even apply for SIJS, you need a state court order. And to get that, you need to have an investigation into the alleged abuse. Here in Connecticut, that's typically done through DCF, the Department of Children and Families, and that can include a social worker or some form of state child welfare agent looking into testimony from the family members, the parents, the child, as well as something like a home visit to make sure that the new home that the child is in is adequate. Those findings are then taken to a hearing with a probate judge here, that is a state-appointed probate judge, and that judge listens to all the findings and makes a declaration. If all goes well, the applicant of SIJS will then get two decrees, one that grants sole guardianship to the adult that's taking care of them here in the U.S. In Regina's case, that was her father. The other decree is the judge essentially stating and declaring that they are eligible to apply for SIJS. So all of that is then taken in with the application for SIJS and sent off to USCIS.
Maysoon, we mentioned you parsing through a lot of data during this investigation. That's why I admire you so much, because scary part of reporting is going through data requests and filing FOIAs and then getting the data and then actually having to read copious amounts of information. Some of the data you pulled showed special immigrant juvenile status petitions by fiscal year. Mm-hmm. What patterns did you notice while digging through that data?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we noticed, the one that was most stark, was that Connecticut is part of a broader national trend. So nationally, we're seeing a huge influx in cases ever since fiscal year 2022, and that was the same thing for Connecticut. And so just so people have an idea, in fiscal year 2016, there were only 162 petitions for SIJS, and at fiscal year 24, it was jumped to 1,730. On the national level, it's on the tens of thousands, but that's kind of what we noticed. We also noticed that the cases almost doubled from 2022 to 2023, and there's so many reasons that could be, but that's kind of what the data told us, and it thankfully wasn't that hard to parse through, so I was very glad. That was kind of the easiest part about the story.
And I think that's kind of what we're going to get into next, is the reasons that people are kind of using as to why this is spiking. Some critics of the program say that people are misusing the system for their advantage. You spoke with East Hartford immigration attorney Aaron O'Neill about that. Let's listen to what she told you.
You might hear that there's some abuse being done by people taking advantage of humanitarian, systems that lead to status. But in these cases, you have an impartial Connecticut state court probate judge who has heard the testimony, who has read the evidence, who's looked at the affidavits, and has determined the credibility and eligibility for these cases. So it's not in a vacuum. It's not something that's forged. It's not something that's made up. You have an independent judge making this determination.
Can you tell me more about the criticisms of the program and why Attorney O'Neill would kind of bat those away?
Yeah, so the criticisms around the program primarily surround the alleged abuses of the program. USCIS last month put out a report that highlighted the drastic increase that Maysoon highlighted in her own findings in petitions since the Biden era policy. Within those findings, they had concerns of false claims of parental maltreatment, as well as applicants with identity fraud in their applications. It also identified hundreds of SIJS recipients who were, quote, known or suspected gang members. And it also pointed out that more than half of the applicants are over the age of 18. Now, the program is set up for migrants under the age of 21. So really what the report is trying to imply that since more of them are over the age of 18, it's really not helping the migrant youth that it's trying to target here. But immigration attorneys like Aaron O'Neill are saying that is why this vetting process is in place through an independent investigation, through a judge, to ensure that this program and the status is given to the people that need it most.
And that's a particularly tough thing for Regina if she weren't able to somehow get the status, is that you're telling us that she had to fend for herself when she was younger. And it's easy to say that people that are older, 19, 20, 21, over 21, can fend for themselves. But that's just a tough thing to tell somebody that's had to fend for themselves their whole life. Maysoon, the Trump administration, are they facing any legal challenges over these changes?
Yeah, we currently have a pending federal lawsuit. It was filed in the Eastern District of New York, where attorneys representing migrant children are asking for a judge to restore the protections from deportation. Time will only tell how that turns out, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see more and more of these types of lawsuits popping up.
And then, Danny, help us finish out the show by understanding what's next for Regina and her father, and maybe a little bit more on how she's doing.
Yeah, well, Regina is doing well. Right now, she is currently in the waiting process. She has applied for SIJS and is waiting to hear back. So she's going to be in that 4-year waiting period for a while. But in the meantime, she is studying. She is taking her college courses. She is hoping to focus her studies on immigration law. Something that Maysoon and I were both taken aback by was just how much she cared about the people that were impacted by this, especially the young children that are impacted by this, right? She is one who, yes, is at risk at deportation, but when we spoke with her, she always spoke more about the other people who have experienced worse than her and what they are going through. And I think that's going to translate a lot into the work that she does as she moves forward in her career.
Phenomenal reporting by both of my colleagues here, Daniela Doncel, who is the Latino Communities reporter for Connecticut Public. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And it's been great to see the story come together and watch it. And I'm really appreciative of the time you took to tell it, and also what you've been able to afford to Regina to keep her identity safe as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate you highlighting this story.
Maysoon, terrific reporting, terrific going through the data, and then helping us advance the story forward and helping us understand sort of what's next. Investigative reporter for Connecticut Public, Maysoon, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much.
Today's show produced by Chloe Wynn, and it was a fantastic show. Thank you, Chloe. It was edited by Patrick Scahill. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. A special thanks to Tess Terrible, Megan Fitzgerald, Connecticut Public's outstanding visuals team, and our operations team, including Megan Boone, Joe Koss, Andy Patterson, and the rest of the folks helping us out, and Sam Hawkaday making those graphics. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you so much for listening.